Greetings, wild and tame souls. I'm Lucinda Bakken-White. At age 27, I suffered from a suicidal depression. It was 1987, and not a lot of people were talking about spirituality and soul path. So it was a very debilitating and confusing time for me. I didn't have a lot of support. What happened was, leading up to that, as a child, I was raised by a single mother in the 60s. We didn't have a lot of money, so I spent my days wandering in nature, climbing trees, eating blueberries, talking to animals, and I was very happy. When I was 11, my mother remarried a really nice man who loved me very much, and he adopted me. He wanted me to be successful according to the mainstream values that he was taught, and so he put me into the system to become a yuppie. He encouraged me to go on diets, to lose weight, to go to school, to get advanced degrees, earn a lot of money, and I worked really hard to please him and to fit in because I thought that that would make me happy. So I went to UCLA, I got a master's in business, and by the age 27, I was living the American dream. Remember, this was 1987. I was living in Santa Monica in a condominium with my girlfriends, driving a yellow 911 Porsche to IBM, which was a very coveted job back then, and I had starved myself to go on diets and look good. And one day at work, I noticed there was a big disconnect between the way I was feeling on the inside and the way I looked on the outside, and it scared me. And when I tried to talk to people about it, they said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't feel sorry for you. You have it all. You're beautiful and rich and you have a nice family and great job. Get over it." Well, that made me feel worse because I felt misunderstood. I did believe that I must be crazy and there must be something wrong with me. It became a moment where I just froze. I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't continue to exert effort and do all these things because I was so miserable and I just lost my energy. So I went in, I put in my notice at IBM, which was unheard of back then. Back then, people were lifers at IBM. I quit my job and I moved home with my parents, and I laid on the couch in the basement of their home for 3 months and stared at the wall. Parents didn't know what to do with me. They didn't understand. They didn't know what to say. And I didn't even have the energy to take a shower or go for a walk. And I just cried and stared at the wall and contemplated how I could end my life because I was so miserable. I felt trapped. I could see no options. There was no way out. So I just wanted to die. And frankly, the only reason I didn't kill myself is because I didn't know how. This was before the internet. I couldn't Google it. My parents were health nuts. There were no medications in the house, no pills. I was actually afraid of blood, so I couldn't do it that way. Didn't know how to make a noose. Our garage was open air. I couldn't even sit in a car with the motor on. And my parents were worried that it was their fault. And there was a lot of shame around me going to a psychologist because they thought if you go to psychology, everything is blamed on the parents. And of course, they had done their best and they were amazing parents and they loved me. They were just doing what they thought was the right thing for me, but it didn't resonate with who I was on the inside. And that was the disconnect. That was the confusion. But finally, my mom was just at her wit's end. And she dragged me to therapy. For some reason, I went. And it was a life-changing moment for me. My parents didn't go with me to therapy. They didn't even ask me what happened in therapy because this was really hard for them back then. But it was the first time in my life, and again, I was 27 years old, that somebody actually listened to me. And they weren't judging me. And to be heard was really empowering for me. And to not be judged magnified that. And also what happened was when I was able to talk about these things and get them out of myself, there was like a release. So I felt lighter. And then I could actually see, metaphorically, the words when they were coming out of my mouth. And I was starting to understand things on my own by having that container, that safe space where I could talk. And what I learned in therapy is that there is an authentic part of me that is enlivening, that I hadn't been in touch with because I had been taught to be so concerned with cookie cutter formulas for success, working hard, being productive, making goals, looking into the future, starving myself, going on diets, worrying about what clothes I was going to wear, how I looked, how I behaved, what are the rules, that it was all outside of me, and it was exhausting and constrictive. Somehow I made a commitment to just keep going to therapy because I loved it. And it wasn't that easy because we're talking about me and painful things in my life. We're going back through my childhood. We're talking about my parents. Sometimes I cried. A lot of times I cried, but I kept going. I made a commitment. I actually went to this therapist for 5 years, once a week, and slowly pulled my way out of this hole and learned a lot, and it was empowering. He said the first step was for me to get out of the house. Not that my parents were bad people, but I needed perspective and distance. So I got a job and I got an apartment. I was still halfway sad, but I had a support system and I had a job and I had distance and perspective and I was moving. And then slowly but surely, I just kept getting in closer and opening up and getting deeper, deeper, deeper as to who I was on the inside. And the lesson in that part of my life was that in our 20s, it's really all about taking the best of what we learn from our family and the cultures and groups that we associate with. It could be our church, it could be school, it could be friends on the playground. We take on these belief systems and these ideas and ways of being because we all want to feel lovable and belong and fit in. But we end up shape-shifting ourselves into something that we're not. And that's all good because it's part of the process of learning how to fit into society, the differences in people. But all is good until it gets out of balance. And so in the 20s, when we leave our parents' home, we're meant to go out and make a lot of mistakes, try new things, have adventures, and know that in the mistakes and the so-called failures, we're learning something. And we're developing new belief systems and new experiences that resonate with who we are through trial and error. And we end up, by the time we're 30, this is just a generic outline of part of life stages. By the time we're 30, we've taken the best of what we've learned in our youth from our parents and the surrounding culture and the groups we belong to. And with the 20s, all of these experiences of trial and error, we learn more about who we are. We discard the belief systems and the ways of being that don't really serve our authenticity. And they may have been useful when we were younger, but they aren't anymore. And we bring in the new stuff. And now we have this whole new phase of evolution, this new way of being that's more in balance with what I call like our human self, our temporary experience as human on the earth plane, and our eternal self, our soul, our unique, authentic essence, who we are on the inside, that invisible part of ourselves that's easy to ignore and neglect because you can't see it, but you can feel it. And that's the key, to get in touch with how you feel and follow the feeling.